We have begun.
Hey, hello everybody. My name is Tim Bryce. I'm a forecaster with the National Weather Service in El Paso, Texas. I want to thank you for our fifth and final Monsoon Awareness Week Impacts Hangout. We're going to be talking about heat stress. Earlier this week, we've talked about flash flooding. We've talked about lightning safety. We've talked about microburst winds, downburst winds. Last night, we had a great conversation about dust storms and the different dust storm-related issues. But tonight, we're going to talk about something about the weather that a lot of people don't think about, but it's an underrated killer. We're going to talk about heat. I don't think a lot of people think about heat when it comes to the monsoon season. They more think about thunderstorms and those associated risks like lightning and flooding. But in this case, the heat is definitely something we need to talk about and be aware of. Just so you guys know, I am joining live from the Denver International Airport. If my signal cuts off, I apologize. But right now, John, I was wondering if you could talk a little bit more about, let me introduce everybody, I forgot. First of all, joining me from in El Paso is the WCM, the Warning Coordination Meteorologist, John Fawcett. John, how are you?
I'm doing fine.
Very good. From the Phoenix office, and I believe both Phoenix and Tucson, you guys are either under heat advisories or heat warnings, right? This is Paul Enriquez. He's the science officer there. Paul, how are you doing?
Doing just fine, and we are on day 4 of 9, I believe, for heat warnings at this point.
Wow. Now, you guys set, or I think you tied a record the last couple of days, right?
Right, yesterday we tied our record yesterday of 115. Today we came up a degree short. It hit 114, but we've been at 112 or higher since Monday.
Wow, it's impressive. Joining us from Tucson is Glenn Lader. He's a forecaster over there. Glenn, how are you doing?
I'm doing great, Tim. Not quite as hot down here as in Phoenix. We still have excessive heat warnings, but only about 110 in Tucson, so marginally better, I suppose.
I suppose it's all relative, I guess. Also joining us today is the Warning Coordination Meteorologist from Midland, Mark Strobin. Mark, how are you doing?
Fine. It's a very chilly 90 degrees out. I almost have to put a sweater on.
In comparison. And finally, from the forecast office in Albuquerque, Jason Frazier's joining us. He's a forecaster up there. Jason, how are you doing up there?
Doing well. Just getting ready for our first blast of heat here coming this weekend.
That's very true. So we're all of us we're either under a lot of heat right now or we're going to be under heat this weekend. So John, can you talk a little bit about the underrated killing of, or how the underratedness of heat as a killer is?
Yes, but Tim, before I do that, I want to thank you for facilitating Monsoon Awareness Week Hangouts all week, first from Kansas City at your training course, and now at an airport between flights. I mean, how many people would do that? We're very, very thankful for that. And yes, I think people will understand if your signal cuts out or if your video freezes up now and then. But now back to heat. Heat is...
John,
yes.
John, one other thing real quick. I forgot to mention the hashtag. So if anybody wants to tweet us a question, feel free to tweet us at the hashtag MAW 2015. That's Monsoon Awareness Week 2015. So if you have a question about the heat, feel free to tweet us at that hashtag and we'll get your question answered. All right, I apologize, John. Go right on ahead.
No, that's fine. Tweet the heat. Anyway, yes, heat is an underrated killer. It's a silent killer. It doesn't grab the headlines like a tornado or a flash flood, or like other things have been doing this year. It adds up steadily during the year. But if you look at all weather-related threats, not just storms, anything, heat, cold, heat. On average, ends up I guess winter. That sounds too hot. But in an average year, the average is going to be the top weather-related killer. But unless there's heat wave in the Midwest, like in 1980, 1,200 deaths, you're not going to hear too much about it. And that's why it can catch people by surprise. And you have to follow the heat safety rules, which we'll be going over later. I pay close attention today because, especially in Tucson and Phoenix, that's quite excessive what they're going through right now. Here in El Paso, we had our first 100-degree day yesterday, 102, but we've cooled off a little bit today. We're not reaching 100. We've actually got a few thunderstorms in the area, so I sort of feel guilty when I think of my NWS brethren to the west. And actually, I don't feel guilty. I'm enjoying this quite a bit. Okay, so here's a little introduction there. The silent killer.
Very good. Thank you. And hey, Jason, can you tell us how heat shows up in New Mexico, how it presents itself and some of the hazards? And then once you're done talking, if you could mute your microphone, because I think we're getting a little feedback through your system there.
All right, no problem. So yeah, New Mexico, I think people do associate it with heat being part of the desert Southwest, maybe not necessarily related to a lot of heat stress because we don't really typically have those relative humidities that are high that really aid to heat stress and heat-related illnesses. But with temperatures expected to get close to the upper 90s and even approaching over 100 here this week, and we're definitely very much within that range of being able to have a lot of heat impacts. So it's something that's definitely a big topic we want to warn people. It is definitely one of the biggest killers of people weather-wise here in New Mexico. And with us entering the late June period, this is the time where we're climatologically the warmest throughout the entire year. So this is when we need people to pay attention most and start practicing some of those safe practices that is necessary to avoid having the heat really impact you each day.
All right.
As we know, it's been very warm in Arizona the last several days, and I was wondering if Paul, if you could talk a little bit about how the heat has been impacting the state of Arizona.
We've had this heat wave really unfolding. We saw it coming fairly well. We started talking about it last week. I mean, one thing we can be thankful about is our weather prediction. Our models have gotten really good in predicting these large synoptic events. We see indications of them a full week to a week and a half ahead of time even. So that gives us a lot of confidence to go ahead and act on that. We can be more aggressive in our forecast, and we can be a lot more aggressive in our messaging as well. And then we can get this information out to our partners who really need that. We were able to get heat watches out well ahead of time, convert to the heat warnings, and it has been turning out to be a pretty significant event. It looks like a little bit of a wonky statistic, but look at the run of days with 112 or higher, and right now, today was day 5, and it looks like we're going to be probably hit 9, and if we do that, that's going to tie the record for longest streak on record. So, I mean, yes, Phoenix gets hot, but there is such a thing as too hot even for here, and even if it does normally get somewhat hot here, that doesn't make it any less dangerous. There are a lot of people that it impacts. As we already been talking about, heat is the biggest killer even here. We really, I think, still don't have a full grasp on just how many people are impacted by the heat in the Phoenix area. Number of statistics we've seen from Maricopa County, where Phoenix is at, that's on the order of like 30 to 50 a year. I mean, compare that to flash flooding or lightning, it's an order of magnitude higher. It's just kind of insidious. It's not something we really think about. It's always there. So we get this information out. Hopefully people take some action to mitigate. I know we have partners that kind of spring into action a little bit more when we actually do jump to that heat warning, and we're not just talking about it being really hot. So we see a lot of activity going on out there with hydration stations being open, and a lot of people don't know the hydration stations are for anyone. They're not just for transient homeless populations or folks that can't afford to run electricity. I mean, literally anyone can walk up there and just get a cool bottle of water, which is kind of nice. But you know, we have to think about just, you know, there is still roughly about 2%, amazingly 2% of the Phoenix population doesn't have air conditioning. So I mean, like 1 out of 50 people. But air conditioning is very expensive to run as well. I mean, not everyone can afford the electric bills that come with that. You know, a $200 electric bill. I remember being in Phoenix when I was a general forecaster years ago. Had a small 1-bedroom apartment with 700 square feet, not very well put together. Electric bill in this apartment would go up to $200 a month during the summer. I mean, that's a lot to pay for just electricity for keeping it somewhat cool. So I mean, it's a big impact on our community here, and we're doing what we can to get that information out.
Wow.
Very good.
Oh,
Tim's gotten out a little bit.
Tim, I think you muted your mic.
I did. I kept clicking on it. So here we go. So hey, Glenn or Paul, you guys said that the models were kind of got a good handle on this. You were able to get watches and warnings out ahead of time. How important is it to your emergency manager partners or the community to get the word out ahead of time that it's going to be we're going to go into a real long hot streak?
I think, for us, I think it's really important. The more, it's constantly what we hear from customers is the more heads up we can give them, the better. So, I mean, if they can start pre-positioning materials or just getting the word out that it's going to get really hot. It's been kind of a little different this summer as well because we have had a really cool spring, unseasonably cool. I mean, we had a number of weekends in May where the temperatures were in the 70s and 80s. It's really weird for Phoenix for that to happen. So normally, it's more gradual warm up where we're hitting the 90s and then getting into the hundreds here in June, and we're getting a little bit more of a weather whiplash here. So it is important for us to get that out in the media as well. Our media partners are huge in getting this information out. So I mean, Phoenix is a big city. It's a large TV market. So whatever weather is going on, these guys are going to latch on to, which I'm sure you've been talking about over the week. Whether it's dust storms or flash flooding or heat. Kind of everything gets blown up into a big deal. So they do a good job of getting the word out and letting folks know that's going to be hot out. But we talk about, the heat warnings aren't necessarily just for those folks who are watching TV. I mean, yeah, there's going to be people that we want to make sure they're mitigating and not going for that after-work hike, or maybe even in this instance where we're having lows in the mid-80s, don't go for hikes in the morning either. But it's really to hit those populations that have a much higher risk of the heat. I mean, someone like myself and a lot of the people here that work in this office, we were able to self-mitigate this heat to a tremendous deal. We live in air-conditioned homes, we drive air-conditioned cars, we come to an air-conditioned office. We're subjugated to the dangers of the heat for a very small portion of the day. So these heat warnings aren't necessarily for segments of the population like us. So it's important that in our messaging that we try to tailor for those folks that we are trying to hit. I'll let Glenn comment on how they're handling it in Tucson as well.
Yeah, what you said, Paul, it pretty much applies down here as well. Of course, Tucson, the main difference between Tucson and Phoenix, as I'm sure many of you know, is Tucson's a little bit higher in elevation by about 1,000 feet from Phoenix. So our typical summer day, when it's really hot, maybe about 3 or 4 degrees cooler, and that's the trend we've seen in the last few days. Now, our criteria for excessive heat is just a little bit different than what Phoenix has. So, for example, because it's not quite as hot here and our criteria is such, we have only had excessive heat warning that we put out last night for today and tomorrow. We're expecting Tucson to be about 111 degrees. But we've been, like Paul said, we were notifying our partners well in advance of this heat event. So everyone knew it was going to be hot, 110 degrees in Tucson. But even in our higher elevations, southeast in Tucson, where it's 4,000 feet, where you're getting in excess of 100 degrees, it's pretty hot for them as well. So still relative to what the population is used to. But what's also important to keep in mind is no matter what you're used to, the vulnerabilities are more or less the same. You still want to keep the same tips in mind when it comes to heat safety. For example, always wanting to check the back seat. We have a saying, beat the heat, check the back seat, because you never want to leave children in the back seat of vehicles. You want to watch your pets, make sure they're not outside. If you're going to walk your pets, make sure you're doing it very early in the morning. You don't want them out when it's 110 degrees out. I'm sure you don't want to be outside either. And another thing about the heat is, I think Paul mentioned this, but I think it's good to reiterate, is that heat is by far the #1 killer in Arizona, and I'm sure for the Southwest as a whole. So it's nothing to be taken lightly. Always want to keep hydrated. Because the next thing you know, if you're not paying attention, you're going to get into a heat stress situation and things will just go downhill from there. So those are some of the tips you always want to keep in mind and try to beat the heat.
Tim, I noticed that Alex Tardy, WCM from San Diego's office, joined us, and he deals with Palm Springs. They get pretty hot.
Yeah, I wanted to talk to. I noticed that Alex dropped in. So Alex, you know, we say San Diego, you don't think about a lot of heat issues there, but you guys actually cover some of the hottest parts of the country there. Can you talk about how your office works with the heat?
Yeah, we do. Just yesterday, Palm Springs area was between 116 and 119, actually setting records. The Borrego Springs area in Ocotillo Wells is very well known for extreme heat. Every year they get over 120. The past several days they've been 115 every day, and that'll continue this weekend. The way we've been dealing with the heat, other than the obvious things like air conditioner and all that, is we've been working with the public health departments for our counties quite closely. In fact, for this heat event in San Diego County in the deserts, which covers Anza Borrego Park, we had conference calls all week with them in preparation. And what they do is they coordinate with the libraries to open up the cooling centers in those areas. And typically those are just libraries, and it gets more complicated when it's a weekend or extended hours because they have to staff them. Often in these libraries, we're told by the community planners and the other various health agencies, they will supply water and snacks for those who come in, and they are open to the public. And it's a way for people to get a relief from that extreme heat. Like Paul was saying, even in our region, it's a big spread on who has air conditioning and who doesn't. And a lot of people really try to cut back even when they have it and not run the air conditioning. And I think what's really important, like with the event we're in right now, the heat wave we're in now, it's a prolonged event. It's many days. It's 5 or 6 days. So you have cumulative impacts. It's June. It's supposed to be hot, but we're still not acclimated to it. It's the first real big extended heat wave this year. So getting the message out in public press releases through our counties. In fact, San Diego County will push notify people on their cell phones that they're in a heat advisory or an excessive heat warning. So we work directly with the public health, who works directly with OES, Office of Emergency Services. And it's all about getting the message out. Right now we're dealing with a major wildfire as well. So the Palm Springs area that you mentioned is in the hundreds, and they were cooler today only because of dense smoke acting a blanket, like a cloud cover, over the region. So they're really getting the worst of it with the smoke now and then the extreme heat.
Now, Alex, that fire is out in the San Bernardino Mountains, is it not?
Yeah, that's correct. It's high up in the mountains on the mostly north-facing slope, so it's in deep timber at 9,000 feet. And the fire, we don't know exactly the cause of it, but Thursday night it exploded from about 100 acres. Wednesday night into Thursday during the day, sorry, it exploded from 100 acres overnight to about 10,000. And a lot of that was from the warm temperatures, but the dry air mass that we're in now. We're not in a monsoon pattern, we're in a dry air mass, and humidity's got down to 5 to 6% during the night.
Well, if you could get that fire put out, because I have to go camping with a church group in the San Bernardino Mountains in about 2 or 3 weeks. So if you could get that fire put out, I'd appreciate it.
Well, there'll probably be another one. So as soon as we get one out, with how dry conditions are, there'll probably be another one. In fact, there's been several small ones with just the onshore winds that we have in San Diego County. So it's going to be a long summer.
Wow. I bet with that dry air mass it is. Hey, Mark, over in Midland, I don't think, we talk about heat a lot there. They're real focused on tornadoes and flooding. But how do you guys get the word out and talk about heat in your area?
Yeah, we work very closely with emergency management, and with the local, with some of the cities too. I mean, it gets quite hot out here in West Texas, even at 3,000 feet elevation. Midland's record high temperature is 116 degrees. And the hottest temperature in our area is in Monahans. They once reached 120 degrees years ago, and they're about 2,800 feet elevation. What's also important to know is, and not everybody knows it, is that temperature is measured in a shade. A lot of people sometimes think it's 116, 110. That's not in the sun, that's in the shade. So in the sun, it could be quite a bit hotter, too. I think that's important for people to know that. When I go out and give safety talks, that everybody realizes, where temperature is measured.
Wow, that's impressive. Now, we got a question on Twitter. I'm going to read it out loud and see if somebody can answer it here. I don't know if Paul is still here, but the Twitter question was, how important are PWS stations to monsoon modeling?
Oh, that would have been perfect for Paul.
I know, and he left us. Does anyone want to take a stab at that, or we can wait? There's Paul.
Yeah, I'm here. Sorry, I was just muting my stuff. So, you want me to answer
Paul,
the Twitter question?
Yeah, could you? Yeah, go ahead and answer the how important are PWS stations to monsoon modeling?
Right, the personal weather stations. To some extent, they can be pretty important, and on the other hand, they're not important at all. I mean, it's kind of in between, and it really depends on the weather model and how it's assimilating, how it's ingesting, how it's taking up all those observations. Depending on, if someone has their personal weather station, they're feeding it into the MADIS system, so then it can be used by National Weather Service and other universities, then it can be pretty helpful. Otherwise, if they just have their own weather station and they have it on their personal website, then we probably don't have any idea it exists. So if someone has to have their weather station out there and have it help for the not just modeling, but for our ability to monitor the weather that's going on, they need to make sure that it's being fed into a large collective system like the MADIS. So feeding it into for modeling. There have definitely been sensitivity studies done looking at different data sets and which ones are more important to use. Typically, we see a lot of importance placed on the weather balloons that get launched. They can have a pretty big impact if they're missing from the models. But also the satellite data is really important too. We don't see as much sensitivity to the things like surface temperatures and surface humidity. So it's not critically important that we have a ton of personal weather stations all over the place. I think we see a lot more utility in those for observing the weather. They're really helpful with figuring out how much rain fell in different areas because that can vary a great deal with these thunderstorms. Also winds, monitoring how strong those winds are, and that might be information we could use if it's a station we know and it's a station that we trust was actually installed correctly. We might use that as part of our forecasting when we're putting together a spot for a wildfire. You just never know. So many stations are out there. There's a lot of good information that can be out there. So that's a very good response, and that's just how it is.
Right. Well, no, I think that was a great question. So I appreciate your response there. Hey, John, it's time to load my airplane. So if you could go ahead, but I'll leave you with a question of what you participate in the Extreme Weather Task Force. What is involved with that? And maybe some of the other offices can talk about some of the partnerships they make with emergency management and other communities to help mitigate the effects of the heat. I'm going to go ahead and sign off, and I'll be back in El Paso. So thanks a lot for everyone joining us this week. I really enjoyed all of these, and you all have a great day and stay safe.
And thank you, Tim. Thank you so much for what you've done for us with this. Okay, the Extreme Weather Task Force is made up of National Weather Service here locally, mainly for El Paso County. It's made up of emergency management, health protective services, all types of folks like that. And it's really probably driven more by the health industry. But we all come together a couple times a year. We have a press conference where we kick off 2 major seasons, and one of them, of course, is heat, and it's focusing mainly on fan drives. That's where you try to get Walmart and agencies like that, department stores like that, to donate fans that can be given out to folks that qualify, they have to go through this checklist to see whether we would be able to give them free fans, which I may add, the fans work indoors until about 95 degrees, and then it's not going to help you at all. So air conditioning, of course, would be more important. They're very good about getting out the safety tips. One of the things they started is called the buddy system. Try to find out in your neighborhood where the elderly live, especially if they're by themselves, and keep an eye on them when the heat gets up there. And I'm really proud to say that when this extreme weather task force started about 12 years ago or so, the death rate in El Paso, there's double digits, 10 to 12 a summer, and now it's down to 2, 3, or 4. So the efforts have been realized. There's been success, and yet that's still 2, 3, or 4 too many, unfortunately. But each city, I'm sure, has their efforts that they try to do, like having air-conditioned places open for folks to get there if theirs breaks down or they're not able to afford air conditioning. And I think Paul has already talked about Phoenix and things that they have done, and I think Alex may have addressed some in his area, but feel free to jump in if you're aware of other efforts that have been lifesavers with heat.
Well, what we do in Midland is we work very closely with the Midland Rockhounds. That's the Oakland A's AA farm team over here in Midland. So we have heat awareness safety and also other safety events like lightning safety, in which during the in-between innings, they flash different tips up on the scoreboard, which is pretty good. And also, sometimes between innings, they have us stand up on the dugout and answer questions, too. We've been lucky enough that we've been able to throw out the first pitch twice a year for the last 3 years, so that's pretty fun. But we work very closely with the Rockhounds. So, I mean, that's kind of a fun group. It's a big outdoor venue. We get over 8,000 people at a game sometimes.
Excellent. Albuquerque. Oh, you have to unmute that.
Here in Albuquerque, I would say due to elevation, heat at times isn't as much of a big concern as, especially when we get closer to the monsoon season, we get into that flash flooding and lightning issues. But we definitely really rely on our emergency manager network. We provide weekly weather briefings every Monday. That's where we can try to hit our biggest points and try to let them know, as well as a lot of public entities know about some of the things coming up, like heat waves. So we've definitely tried to hit home here, at least with our warm-up here coming this weekend, that some extra precaution needs to be taken. I think it's once we actually start seeing times and periods where we have multiple days above 100 and we start having our heat advisories and heat warnings that we need to issue, where we start actually trying to be in more contact with various folks, as others have mentioned, trying to provide more word out, being in contact with our local AAA affiliate at Albuquerque Isotopes, as well as various schools if they're in session. And fortunately, we don't really run into that issue as much thanks to the elevation. We're primarily above 5,000 feet elevation here, so it's usually just very periodic and brief, and we usually get some sort of relief, but that doesn't lessen the impact that is definitely seen out here in our continued effort to try to expand the audience that hears this message.
I imagine, though, Roswell, down in the southeastern portion of your area, gets pretty hot, doesn't it?
Yes, that's probably one of the warmest areas as it kind of goes towards the Midland area down there as well, through the Pecos Valley, where they can really heat up. And we've had, I think it was about 2-3 years ago, we were doing a running track of how many consecutive days they had seen temperatures above 100 degrees, and I think it got up to in the 50, 60 days in a row. Those sort of periods are definitely gather a lot of media attention, and that's where we can really get the message out more clearly, is when more outside sources are involved in what is going on with the weather and wanting to look at those big weather stories, they'll attach to things like that down in Roswell. Fortunately, we've been here until just recently, we had been pretty wet and cool for the start of our season, so we've been able to avoid a lot of the heat that other places may have experiencing, but starting to get into it, and hopefully we won't have any issues as we go forward.
You know, monsoon season.
We're here in Phoenix.
Oh, sorry. Go ahead.
I know I talk about like the heat and how its impact. I could show some websites here too. So just off of our page here, we have the weather.gov/Phoenix, and from there, if you add /heat to that, we have quite a bit of heat information off of there. And you go from there. The heat relief is a big deal here. So just an example here, Phoenix Rescue Mission. My wife was just on her way to drop some water here. This is a very coordinated effort to collect water and get it out to those that really need access to it. And you see here the map. I mean, they have numerous drop-off locations, and then they will get it out to the folks from there. Lots of information in here. If we look at, even the local, radio station, the Hard Rock station here, KUPD, teaming up with Hooters to get water donations taking place. So they have a number of dates here to get that as well. Maricopa Association of Governments, so this is all the cities in the Phoenix area. They team together to try to, again, collect the water. They have a map here, and this map shows all the drop-off locations and then the hydration stations, and then they have the refuge locations. So there's a lot of things that are open here. It's a pretty coordinated effort. A lot of this, again, through the county, also through the Arizona Department of Human Services. They're trying to, they get their arms around this as well. And we do interact with them. We have meetings with them, especially leading into the season, discussing what are they planning to do for the coming summer, what we can do with them, hear what the latest is going on there. We're also, just trying to figure out the impacts. Like I mentioned, I don't think we have a true grasp on just how bad the heat is and how big of an impact it is on our community. So we have been working more with researchers at Arizona State University to get information from them. It's actually quite amazing to see some of the research they've done. They've looked at not just mortality data, not just when people die from heat, because that's obviously the most severe thing that can happen, but also looking at the morbidity data, looking at when people go into emergency rooms because they have heat exhaustion, they need IVs and things like that. They find a very clear demarcation in the data at 105 degrees and higher. Now, 105 degrees in Phoenix is really not that big of a deal during the summertime. Our typical highs during the month of July reach 107. I think during the entire month of July it's above 105. So, they see impacts just about any day of the summer. So that's really interesting information for us to get back. Obviously we can't be issuing heat warnings when it's just a July day, but we try to take that into account when we're putting this information up. And so we do that, like the other guys have been talking about too, email briefings, through our social media, through our forecast. And then ultimately the heat warning is the biggest bell that we can ring to let folks know that it's going to get too damn hot in the desert.
One thing that's interesting, out in Alex's area, you look at the end of monsoon season, goes out to September 30th, but September can be an interesting month, especially for his coastal areas. If you get something you're not even thinking of when you're talking about monsoons or monsoon season, and you get and it doesn't seem to fit in here, but heat-wise, it definitely does when you get your Santa Ana wind situation, and San Diego coastal area is just not used to that kind of heat, right, Alex?
Yeah, that's correct. We've been working a lot with University of California, San Diego, and Scripps on identifying really three major things, and that's heat health impact, that's Santa Ana wind impact, whether it be on temperature and/or fire weather, and other activities related to overall climate change in our region, whether it be sea level or just temperatures. Right now in California, we're coming out of the warmest 12 to 14 month period on record. And the time that you're talking about is kind of the reverse when our coast gets hotter than our deserts. And you're right, that's September through November. And in the past 5 years, we've had several episodes where temperatures on the immediate coast were 105 to 110. And places on our coast, it's hit or miss if they have AC. It's a very low percentage because most of the time they can get away with it with the free air conditioning coming off the Pacific. But those events between September and November is why climatologically that's kind of the warmest time for the immediate coast when we just get enough offshore flow. But it's still summer and the air masses are still really warm that time of year. And then to throw it on top of that, you know, they aren't really dry episodes all the time. We often still have moisture either from the warm ocean temperatures or residual from the monsoon. So that's our time for the immediate coast, which affects, you know, 5 to 6 million people along the coastal section of Orange and San Diego County.
Excellent. Lots of great discussion here. Our time is, you know, we've gone past the 30 minutes, but I'd like each of you to have a shot at a closing remark. How about you, Mark?
To stay hydrated, even up here at 3,000 feet elevation, our normal high is in the mid-90s for 45 straight days from the end of June to the beginning of August. So breaking 100 degrees happens fairly often here. So stay in the shade and keep hydrated.
Excellent. Paul from Phoenix?
Yeah, heat is a big deal. Even in a hot place like Phoenix, it can really get a hold of anyone, even those of us that may have lived here for quite a long time and feel like we're acclimated to it. So it's not something to underestimate at all. Do what we can to mitigate those problems, mitigate and hydrate.
Great. Jason from Albuquerque?
Just that while we also always experience that heat, just to remember to look out for others, especially like things like kids in your cars. Cars can heat up very quickly, can increase about 20 degrees in just 20 minutes. So things like that can really exacerbate a child or things like that in a car. So just be aware of that as part of these heat impacts, and hopefully people can avoid that and avoid issues that come from that.
Oh, and that's going to happen. That's going to happen up there in Albuquerque, regardless of your elevation, huh? Thank you for sharing that. Okay, Glenn, Tucson.
I'll just add to what Jason was saying, and not just the children, but also the elderly are very prone to heat impacts. So check on your elderly neighbors, family, because they're really prone to the heat as well. So just try to stay cool and keep hydrated. That's the best advice we could give you. All
right, and finally, Alex.
Yeah, that's all good advice. Pay attention to the forecast and you know what you're doing and prepare yourself. We find it even here in Southern California, with the millions of people that recreate or just play in the area, that a lot of times are just unprepared. And listen to your body. You know, it'll tell you. You'll start seeing the warning signs. If you don't see it, someone else will notice it. Your face is turning red or something like that, and it's really time to take it easy and stay hydrated, because across the world, heat is the #1 killer, and it is even really high impact in our desert region, despite the precautions and the luxury of having air conditioning.
That's right. Well, you know what? Monsoon Awareness Week is drawing to a close. I want to thank all you folks at the offices representing areas affected by the monsoon this week. We had great discussions on the various hazards and going over the safety rules and some of the science. And it's been an excellent week of Google Hangouts. Folks, take seriously these safety tips that you've been hearing all week. Look at the office in your area, responsible for your area. Look at their websites, and there will be a safety section. There'll be all kinds of interesting information. Great way to stay abreast of what's going to be happening. And a very quick way to do that is just go to weather.gov, and when the map comes up, click on your area, and the office responsible for your area, their website will come up. And again, thank you all, and stay safe this monsoon season.